This free stream of the BBC is available to you from Vermont Public Radio, and you can support us now at vpr.org. And thanks.
To his mind, has said also consistently that he's on path to end the Arab-Israeli conflict, but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will remain with us. He's hoping that the Arab neighbors in the Gulf particularly will put pressure on the Palestinians to essentially give up all their nationalist demands, especially for a future state in the West Bank in particular.
What did you make of Antony Blinken hinting pretty strongly that he had concerns about the status of democratic safeguards within Israel?
So that was the most, I think, remarkable or top headline that came out of the Blinken-Netanyahu meeting earlier this evening. I think Blinken's remarks about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were expected, de-escalating tensions, demanding or requesting calm from both sides, and also these kind of pro forma remarks about the U.S. support for any potential future two-state solution. That was expected, but what wasn't quite expected was how strong a position he took about Netanyahu's plans to overhaul Israel's judiciary system. Really, for many critics, it's the undermining of the judicial system and really ending any checks and balances over the executive in Israel's system of government, and by extension ending Israel as a real, genuine democracy. And so everyone was waiting to see if a senior Biden official like Secretary of State Blinken would actually weigh in on what had been perceived, at least from the American point of view, as a strictly internal Israeli matter, and Blinken did, and really took a very public and, in diplomatic speak, forceful position, saying that Israeli-U.S. relations were based on mutual interest, yes, but also shared values, and really the principles of democratic rule and democratic institutions in particular. And he urged the Prime Minister, standing alongside him, to work via consensus to find a common ground with critics and opposition, and really a growing public revolt against Netanyahu's plans to, like I said, undermine Israel's judiciary.
And Neri, he's off, the Secretary of State, to Ramallah tomorrow to see the Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas. I mean, given what low esteem so many Palestinians seem to hold the Palestinian leadership in, what, if anything, can the U.S. Secretary of State achieve there?
Well, he first of all has to go and visit the Palestinian leadership as well. He can't just visit in Jerusalem with the Israeli side. So he's going there, I think, to also deliver a message of restraint, of calm, to try to lower tensions just on the ground. I think he'll also urge President Abbas to not really and genuinely sever security ties with Israel. The Palestinian security forces and the Israeli security forces actually work in tandem in many respects, trying to uphold stability, especially in the West Bank. Coming out of a very bloody few days in the West Bank late last week, Abbas announced that he was severing those security ties with Israel. It remains to be seen how far the Palestinian leadership actually take that step. So I think the U.S. Secretary of State will urge Abbas not to fully remove those security ties, and also urge the Palestinian president to do what U.S. presidents have urged him to do for many years now, which is internal reforms, democratic reforms, and the like. But no one is really expecting any miracles on that end.
And that was Neri Zilber, an Israeli journalist. Since forever, or since 1066 anyway, English kings have had the right to spend the night before their coronation at the Palace of Westminster, home now to the Houses of Parliament. Why am I telling you this? Well, because it's possible, albeit unlikely, that King Charles III will take up the offer in May before he's formally crowned monarch. But also because there's an absolutely cracking tale about what happened to the King's bed, how it came to be not in the Palace of Westminster, but instead for decades in a family home in Wales, the family of Richard Martin.
My mother, who was an assiduous visitor of local auction sales, used to come back with things. And one day she came back with this pile of opulent timber, carved and gilded, and mattress and all sorts of things. And we sort of took it all out of the van and scratched our heads a bit. And then my father assembled it, and it was this massive bed.
Did she know that it was a bed? I mean, was it auctioned off?
But she didn't know that it was the state bed from the Palace of Westminster. She knew it was obviously pretty special, but we didn't know exactly what it was for a long time because there was no way of knowing, really.
In what way was it a special bed? I mean, paint the picture for me.
Well, if you imagine a sort of average average bed, the bit that you sort of notice most is probably the mattress and the headboard. Well, with this bed, the bottom board, you could actually have withstood a siege with it. I mean, it's a massive piece of very heavily carved and ornate timber with great finials, that like the kind of finials that you get on the sort of tops of church bits. It wasn't a four-poster bed, it's what's called a tester. So there's this great canopy thing that sort of spreads up over the top of it.
Okay.
It's a very, regal-looking object.
So at the time, I mean, it must have been tremendous fun growing up in a house that had a bed like this. I mean, was it used as an objet d'art, something for people to come and admire?
Or was parents, it was put up in their bedroom and they slept in it. And indeed, my youngest brother, I'm one of 7 siblings, and my youngest brother was born in the bed. So it was very much a sort of integral part of our life. And we sort of took it as, mother's kind of aberration, really. And then
happy aberration. But at what point did it change from being this sort of remarkable bed that your mother had come home from auction with to the king's bed?
15, 20 years later, my parents had by this time been in several houses, had restarted a woolen mill in West Wales. And my parents had put the bed up there because it was too big for their house that they had in Wales, so they put it up in the mill. And visitors used to look at it. And then one day, there was a chap called Clive Wainwright, who was keeper of Victorian furniture at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And Clive, he was one of these incredibly keen guys that you just could not say no to. And he came roaring down from London because he got wind that the state bed that he'd been looking for was in this mill in Cardiganshire. And so he came roaring down to see it and told us all about it. And really, until then, we didn't really know what it was.
Right. So somebody who'd visited the mill and seen the bed had sort of communicated this to the furniture expert at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Exactly. Every now and again, Clive, he was always looking for things that had disappeared. One of the problems is that, when you get to a Palace of Westminster or somewhere, they're always putting things away because they don't want them for a while, and then they forget where they put them, and then they get sold off. I think that the bed got sold off. Originally, it was in 1940, in the war, it was moved into storage. And then I think in the 1960-ish was the sort of Brave New World, and we don't want all this fuddy-duddy stuff. And I think quite a lot of stuff was then discarded. And then 20 years later, there was a new interest in it. And then it was people like Clive Wainwright used to go around the country finding stuff which had disappeared from the Palace of Westminster and other royal and government palaces. And as I say, he came down and was terribly excited.
You say he was very excited. What was the reaction inside your family?
My youngest brother was really quite made up with the idea that he'd been born in a bed that was designed for kings to sleep in before their coronation.
And why did it end up back at the Speaker's house, which is where it currently resides?
It took about a year. My parents, because they had trundled it round the country from house to house and had got rather used to it, and I think they were quite sorry to see it go. And I wouldn't like to make some great thing about this, but I think if they'd tried to sell it privately, I suspect they'd have got more money for it than the government gave them. But I think they genuinely really felt quite proud about having kept this thing and probably had stopped it from getting broken up. One rather interesting thing is that there's a piece right at the top of the bed, which looks a bit like a crown, right at the top. It's sort of 15 feet in the air. And every time my parents assembled the bed in different houses, that bit they always had sticking down. And they were quite surprised to find out that in actual fact, it's meant to stick up.
Have you been to see it in its new location?
Do you know, I haven't, although funnily enough, I've had 3 emails today of people who have heard about it who say, come on, let's make a party up and let's go and see it.
Well, I mean, I've seen a photograph of it in its new location on the BBC website, and it looks absolutely magnificent. Did it look that splendid when it was in your house?
We had it slightly lower, and some of the hangings are different because it still had the Victorian hangings. I think these hangings, and they're beautiful, have been made specially for when they put it back. And, I mean, the actual look of it is, well, it just brings back my memory of my childhood, to be honest. It's the thing I remember about my parents' bedroom, was this bed I was going to say in the corner of it, but that's not true. It was fairly dominating in the room, frankly.
What a wonderful interview about a wonderful episode in That Man's Life. Richard Martin and the King's Bed. You can see a picture of the King's Bed on our website, bbc.com/news. This is NewsHour.